In the dusty plains of 1880s Montana, 19-year-old Clara Hawthorne stood trembling at the edge of her family's crumbling homestead, her heart pounding like a drum against her ribs. Her father, a stern man worn thin by debt and drought, had made a deal she couldn't escape: marry Amos Grayson, a widowed rancher twice her age, or watch their farm be seized by the bank. Clara, a girl of delicate beauty with auburn curls and eyes like storm clouds, had never known a man's touch, her innocence guarded by a life of chores and solitude. Amos, grizzled and weathered, was a stranger to her, known only as the man who owned the largest cattle ranch in the county. His 2 children, a boy of 10 and a girl of 7, trailed him like shadows, their mother lost to fever 3 years prior. Clara's dreams of love, of a life chosen by her own heart, were shattered the moment her father signed the marriage contract. She packed her few belongings, a faded dress, a locket from her late mother, a worn Bible, her hands shaking as she boarded the wagon to Amos's ranch. The townsfolk whispered as she passed, their pitying glances stinging worse than scorn. She was a lamb led to slaughter, they thought, bound to a man whose cold demeanor was as infamous as his wealth. Yet Clara held her chin high, her spirit unbroken, though fear gnawed at her core. What kind of life awaited her? Would Amos be cruel, demanding, or worse? And those children, would they resent her, a stranger stepping into their mother's place? As the wagon rattled over the rocky trail, Clara's mind raced with questions, each one heavier than the last. The vast, lonely landscape stretched before her, mirroring the uncertainty of her future. By nightfall, she arrived at the ranch, a sprawling spread of corrals and barns under a sky bruised with stars. Amos stood waiting, his face unreadable, his children clinging to his sides. Clara stepped down, her heart a knot of dread and resolve, knowing this was the beginning of a life she never chose. The first weeks at the ranch were a trial by fire for Clara, her days filled with tasks she'd never imagined. Amos was a man of few words, his instructions gruff but not unkind, directing her to cook, clean, and tend to the children, Ellie and Sam. The children were wary, their eyes sharp with suspicion, especially Ellie, who clung to her father's late wife's memory like a sacred relic. Clara, still reeling from her uprooted life, tried to win them over with small gestures, baking molasses cookies, mending Sam's torn overalls, but their coldness was a wall she couldn't breach. Amos, too, kept his distance, his evenings spent poring over ledgers or riding out to check the cattle, leaving Clara navigate the household alone. She felt household alone. She felt like a ghost in her own home, her virginity a silent weight, a weight reminder of the intimacy, she dreaded yet knew was expected. Nights were the hardest, lying in the small Amos bedroom Amos had given her, separate from his own. She wondered if he'd demand his marital rights or if his heart was still buried with his first wife. The ranch buried with his first wife. The ranch itself was a world of its own, vast and an unforgiving, with hired hands who eyed Clara with curiosity or pity. She learned to milk cows, churn butter, and scrub floors until her hands bled, her body aching but her spirit refusing to break. One evening, she found a dusty journal in the attic, its pages filled with the delicate handwriting of Amos's late wife, Mary. Reading it felt like trespassing, but Clara couldn't stop. Mary's words painted a picture of a kind but distant man, hardened by loss, yet capable of love. Of Clara began love. Clara began to see Amos differently, not as a captain capturer but as a man carrying his own burdens. Still own burdens. Still, the children's rejection stung, and Ellie's sharp tongue cut deep, accusing Clara of trying to erase their mother. Mother. Clara's heart wavered between hope and despair, but a quiet strength grew within her. She began to notice small things, Sam's shy smile when she braided his horse's mane, Amos's brief nod of approval at her cooking. Maybe, she thought, there was a way to carve out a place here, not as a replacement but as herself. As spring turned to summer. As spring turned to summer, Clara found a rhythm in the ranch's relentless demands, her hands growing calloused, oozed, her heart a little less heavy. She began to understand the land's language, the way the wind carried the scent of rain, the low lowing of cattle signaling a storm. Amos, though still reserved, started to linger at the supper table, his deep voice softening as he spoke of the ranch's history or the children's antics. Clara listened, her curiosity about him growing, though she kept her own thoughts guarded. The children, too, began to thaw, especially Sam, who trailed her to the barn, asking questions about her life before the ranch. Ellie remained distant, her blue eyes flashing with defiance whenever Clara tried to mother her. One day, Clara found Ellie crying behind the hay bales, clutching a ribbon that had belonged to Mary. Mary instead of SC scolding, Clara sat beside her, sharing a story of her own mother's loss. For the first time, Ellie didn't pull away, and Clara felt a flicker of hope. Meanwhile, Amos's rare smiles began to stir something in Clara, a warmth she hadn't expected. She caught herself watching him as he worked, his broad shoulders bent over a fence post, his hands steady and sure. Yet the specter of their unconsummated marriage and some loat marriage loomed, a silent question neither dared address. Clara wondered if Amos saw her as a duty, a necessity to fill the void left by Mary. The ranch hands, rough men with kind hearts, began to treat her with respect, calling her Miss Clara and tipping their hats. She learned their names, their stories, and found solace in their camaraderie. But whispers reached her ears, rumors of a rival rancher, Silas Boone, who coveted Amos's land and had a reputation for ruthlessness. Clara sensed trouble brewing, especially when Amos returned from town with a furrowed brow, speaking of missing cattle. She She began to feel the weight of the ranch's survival, her roll in it no longer. Winter descended with a brutal chill, blanketing the ranch in snow and tension. Clara's search for the deed became an obsession, her nights spent poring over Mary's journal for clues. She found a cryptic note about a heart of the home, which led her to a loose floorboard under the kitchen table. There, wrapped in oilcloth, was the deed, its ink faded but legal, proving Amos's claim beyond dispute. Clara's heart soared, she'd found a way to save the ranch. But her triumph was short-lived. Silas Boone's men struck under cover of a blizzard, setting fire to a storage shed and scattering half the herd. Amos, enraged, rallied his hands to guard the ranch, but Clara saw the fear in his eyes. She showed him the deed, and for the first time, he looked at her not as a girl, but as a partner. He took her hand, his grip warm and firm, and thanked her with a sincerity that made her blush. The children, sensing the danger, clung to Clara, their trust now unshakable. Ellie even gave her a drawing, a crude sketch of their family with Clara in the center. The gesture broke something in Clara, tears falling as she realized she loved them as her own. But Silas wasn't done. Word came that he'd bribed a local judge to challenge the deed's validity, claiming Amos had forged it. Clara, furious, insisted they confront Silas in town, her courage surprising even herself. Amos agreed, and they rode out together, the deed tucked safely in Clara's coat. In town, Silas's smug grin faltered when Clara presented the document, her voice steady as she recounted its discovery. The judge, an honest man, upheld the deed, but Silas's men grew restless, their hands twitching toward guns. Clara stood firm, her gaze locking with Amos's, a silent pact forming between them. They returned to the ranch as a united front, but Clara knew Silas wouldn't stop. She began to teach Ellie and Sam how to hide in the root cellar, her heart aching at the necessity. The ranch was her home now, its people her family, and she'd fight for them with everything she had. Amos, watching her, seemed to see her anew, his silence filled with unspoken promises. The standoff with Silas Boone came to a head in early spring, as the snow melted and the plains bloomed with wildflowers. Clara had grown into her role, her days a blend of nurturing the children and strategizing with Amos to protect the ranch. The townsfolk, once skeptical, now rallied behind them, inspired by Clara's quiet strength. She'd become a fixture at the ranch, her laughter echoing in the kitchen, her hands steady as she helped brand cattle. Amos, too, had changed, his gruff exterior softened, his touches lingering when he passed her a tool or steadied her on a horse. Their marriage, still unconsummated, was a bond of trust, not obligation, and Clara found herself yearning for more, her heart torn between fear and desire. But Silas's threats escalated. He sent a letter demanding Amos sell the ranch or face violence. Clara, refusing to cower, suggested a bold plan: invite Silas to the ranch under the pretense of negotiation, then expose his crimes to the sheriff, who'd arrived from the state capital. Amos hesitated, worried for Clara's safety, but her resolve won him over. The day Silas arrived, the air was thick with tension. Clara greeted him with a calm she didn't feel, her eyes scanning for his men hiding in the hills. The children were safe in the cellar, and the ranch hands stood ready. Silas, smug and overconfident, mocked Amos, but Clara interrupted, presenting evidence from Mary's journal, letters detailing Silas's past attempts to sabotage the ranch. The sheriff, hidden nearby, stepped forward, arresting Silas for theft and arson. His men, outnumbered, fled into the night. Clara's heart pounded as the danger passed, her body trembling with relief. Amos pulled her close, his arms a haven, and whispered words of gratitude that felt like a vow. The ranch was safe, the deed secure, and Clara realized she'd found her place, not as a forced bride, but as a woman who'd fought for her home. That night, as the children slept, Amos took her hand, leading her to the porch, where the stars seemed to celebrate their victory. With Silas behind bars, the ranch blossomed into a haven of peace, its fields thriving under Clara's and Amos's care. The children, now fully hers in heart, filled the house with laughter, their drawings pinned to the kitchen walls. Clara, no longer the frightened girl of a year ago, moved with confidence, her auburn curls catching the sunlight as she worked alongside Amos. Their bond had deepened, built on shared trials and quiet moments, mending fences, reading to the children, stealing glances that spoke of unspoken love. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Amos took her hand, his voice low and earnest. He told her he'd never expected to love again, that she'd brought light to a life he thought was forever dimmed. Clara, her heart full, admitted her own fears, her hopes, her growing love for him and the children. They spoke of their marriage, untouched by physical intimacy, and Amos confessed he'd waited for her to be ready, to choose him freely. Clara, tears in her eyes, leaned into him, her kiss a promise of a future they'd build together. The ranch hands, now family, celebrated their union with cheers, their loyalty cemented by Clara's courage. The town, too, embraced her, calling her the heart of the Grayson Ranch. Clara began to teach Ellie and Sam about the land, passing on Mary's wisdom from the journal, ensuring her memory lived on. The ranch thrived, its cattle fetching high prices, its fields green with promise. Clara felt a deep contentment, her life no longer forced but chosen, her love for Amos a flame that warmed every corner of her heart. Yet she wondered about the future. Would new challenges arise? Would their love endure the trials of the frontier? As she stood on the porch, Amos's arm around her, she felt ready for whatever came, her spirit as vast as the plains. The stars above seemed to whisper of hope, of a life forged not by duty, but by love and resilience. The shocking twist came not from danger, but from within Clara herself. One spring morning, as she tended the garden with Ellie, a letter arrived from her father, now living in a distant town. He begged forgiveness, revealing he'd been coerced by Silas Boone to force Clara's marriage, a debt paid to save his own life. The revelation shook Clara, unraveling the narrative of her sacrifice. She wasn't just a pawn in her father's desperation, she'd been a piece in Silas's larger scheme to weaken Amos. Furious, she confronted her past, writing back to her father with forgiveness but firm boundaries, choosing her new family over old wounds. Amos, learning of this, held her close, his pride in her strength evident. The true shock, though, was Clara's realization of her own power. She'd transformed from a girl forced into a life she didn't want into a woman who'd reshaped that life into one of purpose and love. The ranch, once a prison, was now her kingdom, shared with Amos and the children. They built a new house, its walls filled with laughter, its rooms a testament to their bond. Clara and Amos finally consummated their marriage, not as a duty but as a celebration of their love, their intimacy a seal on their shared journey. The children, calling her Mama without hesitation, grew strong under her care, their futures bright with possibility. The town honored Clara with a small festival, naming a schoolhouse after her, a symbol of her impact. As she stood beside Amos, watching Ellie and Sam play in the fields, Clara knew the ending wasn't just shocking, it was triumphant. She'd turned a forced marriage into a love story, a stranger's children into her own, a ranch under threat into a legacy. The plains stretched before her, endless and free, mirroring the life she'd claimed. Her heart, once heavy with fear, now soared with the certainty that she'd written her own story, one of courage, love, and an ending no one could have predicted.